Once there was a poor tailor who had a son named Aladdin. Aladdin was a careless and lazy boy who would only play all day with other idle boys in the streets. This made his father very sad, and he eventually died because of it. Even though Aladdin's mother cried and begged him to change, Aladdin continued with his lazy ways. One day, while Aladdin was playing in the streets as usual, a stranger approached him and asked about his age. The stranger also wondered if Aladdin was the son of Mustafa the tailor. Aladdin replied, "Yes, sir, I am his son, but he passed away a long time ago." Hearing this, the stranger, who was actually a famous magician from Africa, hugged and kissed Aladdin. He said, "I am your uncle and recognized you because you look like my brother. Go and tell your mother that I am coming." Excitedly, Aladdin ran home and told his mother about his newly discovered uncle. His mother said, "Really, my child? Your father had a brother, but I always believed he was dead." Nevertheless, she prepared a meal, and Aladdin was told to go and find his uncle, who arrived with fruit. He knelt down and kissed the spot where Aladdin's father used to sit, and he reassured Aladdin's mother not to be surprised since he had been away from the country for 40 years. Then he turned to Aladdin and asked him what his occupation was. Aladdin felt ashamed and looked down while his mother started crying. When the magician learned that Aladdin was lazy and unwilling to learn a trade, he offered to open a shop for him and provide him with goods to sell. The next day, he bought Aladdin a nice set of clothes and took him around the city, showing him all the interesting things. They returned home in the evening, and Aladdin's mother was thrilled to see her son looking so fine. The next day, the magician took Aladdin to some beautiful gardens far outside the city gates. They sat down near a fountain, and the magician pulled out a cake from his bag. He divided the cake between them, and they enjoyed it together. After that, they continued their journey until they were almost near the mountains. Aladdin was feeling extremely tired and wanted to go back, but the magician kept him interested with delightful stories and convinced him to keep going. Finally, they reached a place where two mountains were separated by a narrow valley. "We won't go any further," said the magician, pretending to be Aladdin's uncle. "I will show you something incredible. While I start a fire, why don't you gather some sticks?" Aladdin did as he was told, and once the fire was lit, the magician sprinkled some special powder onto it and said magical words. Suddenly, the ground shook a little in front of them, revealing a flat stone with a brass ring in the middle. The stone could be lifted by pulling the ring. Aladdin got scared and tried to run away, but the magician caught him and gave him a strong blow that knocked him down. Confused and pitiful, Aladdin asked, "What did I do wrong, uncle?" The magician then spoke more kindly and said, "Don't be afraid, but listen to me carefully. Underneath this stone, there is a treasure meant only for you. No one else can touch it, so you must do exactly as I say." When Aladdin heard the word treasure, he forgot his fears. He obediently grabbed the ring and said the names of his father and grandfather, just as the magician had instructed. Surprisingly, the stone lifted easily, revealing a set of steps. The magician said, "Go down those steps. At the bottom, you will find an open door leading to 3 large halls. Be careful not to touch anything as you walk through them, or you will instantly die. These halls will lead you to a garden full of delicious fruit trees. Keep walking until you find a niche on a terrace where there is a lamp with a lit flame. Pour out the oil from the lamp and bring it to me." The magician then took off a ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, wishing him good luck. Aladdin found everything just as the magician had described. He picked some fruit from the trees and finally reached the entrance of the cave, holding the lamp in his hands. Suddenly, the magician shouted, "Hurry up and give me the lamp!" However, Aladdin refused to hand over the lamp until he was out of the cave. The magician became very angry and threw more powder onto the fire. He said something and instantly the stone rolled back into its place, sealing the cave shut. After that, the magician left the country, which clearly showed that he was not Aladdin's uncle, but a clever magician. He had read about a magnificent lamp in his magic books, a lamp that would give him immense power and make him the most powerful person in the world. However, he could only obtain the lamp if someone else handed it to him. He had chosen the naive Aladdin for this purpose, planning to take the lamp and then kill him afterwards. For 2 days, Aladdin was trapped in darkness, crying and feeling sad. Finally, he clasped his hands together in prayer, accidentally rubbing the ring that the magician had forgotten to take from him. Suddenly, a huge and terrifying genie emerged from the ground. The genie said, "What do you want from me? I am the slave of the ring, and I will obey all your commands." Aladdin, without fear, said, "Please help me escape from this place." Immediately the ground opened up, and Aladdin found himself outside. As soon as his eyes adjusted to the light, he went back home. But he fainted on the doorstep. When he regained consciousness, he told his mother everything that had happened. He showed her the lamp and the fruits he had gathered from the garden, which were actually precious stones. Then Aladdin asked for some food. Sadly, his mother said, "Oh dear, I don't have any food in the house, but I have spun a little cotton that I can sell." However, Aladdin told her to keep the cotton because he wanted to sell the lamp instead. Since the lamp was dirty, Aladdin's mother started rubbing it to make it shine and fetch a better price. Suddenly, a hideous genie appeared and asked what she desired. Aladdin's mother fainted in fear, but Aladdin quickly grabbed the lamp and boldly said, "Bring us something to eat." The genie returned with a silver bowl, 12 silver plates filled with delicious food, 2 silver cups, and 2 bottles of wine. When Aladdin's mother regained consciousness, she wondered where this splendid feast had come from. Aladdin told her not to ask questions, but to simply enjoy the food. They sat and ate breakfast until it was time for dinner. During the meal, Aladdin explained to his mother about the lamp and its magical powers. His mother begged him to sell it and not get involved with spirits or genies. But Aladdin replied, "No, since fate has made us aware of its powers, we will use it along with the ring, which I will always wear on my finger." After they finished eating all the food the genie had brought, Aladdin sold one of the silver plates and continued selling them one by one until they were all sold. Each time he would ask the genie for another set of plates. And so, Aladdin and his mother lived for many years, using the lamp and the genie's magic. So one day, Aladdin heard an order from the Sultan proclaiming that everyone was to stay at home and close his shutters, while the princess, his daughter, went to and from the bath. Aladdin was seized by a desire to see her face, which was very difficult, as she always went veiled. He hid himself behind the door of the bath and peeped through a chink. The princess unveiled her face as she entered the room, and she looked so beautiful that Aladdin instantly fell in love with her. When he returned home, he was completely transformed, which scared his mother. Aladdin confessed his deep love for the princess and expressed his intention to ask her father for her hand in marriage. His mother burst into laughter upon hearing this, but Aladdin eventually convinced her to go to the Sultan and make his request. She prepared a napkin and placed inside it the magical fruits from the enchanted garden, which glimmered and shone like exquisite jewels. With trust in the magic lamp, she took the fruits to please the Sultan and embarked on her journey. When she arrived at the Sultan's court, the Grand Vizier and the council members were already present. She positioned herself in front of the Sultan, but received no attention from him. She repeated this routine for a week, standing in the same spot. On the 6th day after the council session ended, the Sultan remarked to his vizier about a certain woman he noticed in the audience chamber every day, carrying something in a napkin. He instructed the vizier to summon her during the next session so that he could discover her purpose. The next day, when the vizier signaled, the woman approached the front of the throne and knelt down. She stayed in that position until the Sultan told her to stand up. He then asked her what she wanted. The woman hesitated, so the Sultan dismissed everyone except the vizier and encouraged her to speak freely. He promised to forgive her in advance for anything she might say. She explained to him about her son's intense love for the princess. She told the Sultan that she had tried to convince her son to forget about the princess, but he insisted on asking the Sultan for her hand in marriage. The woman asked the Sultan to forgive both her and her son Aladdin. The Sultan kindly inquired about what was in the napkin that she was carrying. She revealed the jewels and presented them to him. The Sultan was astonished and turned to the vizier, asking for his opinion. He wondered if he should give the princess to someone who valued her so highly. The vizier, who wanted the princess for his own son, requested that the Sultan delay the marriage for 3 months. He hoped that during that time, his son could find a way to offer an even more valuable gift. The Sultan agreed to this and instructed Aladdin's mother not to come before him again for 3 months, even though he agreed to the marriage. Aladdin patiently waited for almost 3 months. However, after 2 months had passed, his mother went into the city to buy oil and discovered that everyone was celebrating. She asked what the occasion was, and someone told her that the Grand Vizier's son was going to marry the Sultan's daughter that night. She hurriedly went back and informed Aladdin, who was initially overwhelmed by the news. But then he remembered the magic lamp. He rubbed it, and the genie appeared, asking him what his wish was. Aladdin explained that the Sultan had broken his promise and that the vizier's son was going to marry the princess. He commanded the genie to bring the bride and groom to him that very night. The genie obediently agreed. Aladdin went to his room and, just as he expected, at midnight the genie transported the bed with the vizier's son and the princess. "Take this new married man," Aladdin said, "and put him outside in the cold and return at daybreak." Whereupon the genie took the vizier's son out of bed, leaving Aladdin with the princess. "Fear nothing," Aladdin said to her. "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm will come to you." The princess was too frightened to speak, and passed the most miserable night of her life, while Aladdin lay down beside her and slept soundly. At the appointed hour, the genie fetched in the shivering bridegroom, laid him in his place, and transported the bed back to the palace. That morning, the sultan came to say good morning to his daughter. The sad vizier's son quickly stood up and hid himself, while the princess refused to speak and felt very sad. The sultan sent her mother to talk to her, and her mother asked, "Why won't you speak to your father? What happened?" The princess sighed deeply and finally told her mother what had happened during the night. Her bed had been taken to a strange house, and certain things had occurred there. Her mother didn't believe her at all, and told her to get up and consider it just a silly dream. The same thing happened again the following night. When the princess still refused to speak the next morning, the sultan became very angry and threatened to kill her. In fear, she finally admitted everything and asked him to confirm it with the vizier's son. The sultan instructed the vizier to ask his son, and the son admitted the truth. The vizier's son also expressed that he loved the princess very much, but he would rather die than experience another terrifying night like that, and he wished to be separated from her. His request was granted, and the joyful celebrations came to an end. When the 3 months had passed, Aladdin sent his mother to remind the sultan of his promise. She stood in the same spot as before, and the sultan, who had forgotten about Aladdin, suddenly remembered him and summoned her. However, upon seeing her poverty, the sultan became even less inclined to keep his word. He sought advice from his vizier, who suggested that the sultan demand an impossibly high value for the princess, one that no man could meet. The sultan then addressed Aladdin's mother, saying, "Good woman, a sultan must honor his promises, and I will honor mine. However, your son must first send me 40 basins filled with gold and jewels. These basins should be carried by 40 black slaves, led by 40 white ones, all dressed splendidly. Tell him that I await his response." Aladdin's mother bowed and returned home, thinking that all hope was lost. She conveyed the sultan's message to Aladdin, adding, "He may have to wait a very long time for your answer." Aladdin replied confidently, "Not as long as you think, mother. I would do much more than that for the princess." He summoned the genie, and within moments the 80 slaves arrived and filled up their small house and garden. Aladdin instructed them to proceed to the palace 2 by 2, accompanied by his mother. The slaves were dressed so magnificently and adorned with such dazzling jewels that everyone gathered to catch a glimpse of them and the golden basins they carried on their heads. They entered the palace, and after kneeling before the sultan, formed a half-circle around the throne with their arms crossed, while Aladdin's mother introduced them to the sultan. He no longer hesitated and said, "Good woman, go and tell your son that I eagerly await him." Aladdin's mother wasted no time and hurriedly informed Aladdin, urging him to make haste. But before leaving, Aladdin summoned the genie and requested a scented bath, a beautifully embroidered outfit, a horse better than the Sultan's, and 20 attendants. Additionally, he asked for 6 slaves dressed in finery to attend to his mother and 10 purses filled with 10,000 gold pieces. Instantly, his requests were granted. Aladdin mounted his horse and rode through the streets, with the slaves scattering gold as they went. Those who had known him from his childhood days failed to recognize him, for he had grown remarkably handsome. When the Sultan saw him, he descended from his throne, embraced him, and led him into a hall where a feast had been prepared, intending to marry him to the princess that very day. However, Aladdin declined, stating, "I must first build a palace worthy of her." With that, he took his leave. Upon returning home, he instructed the genie, saying, "Construct for me a palace made of the finest marble, adorned with jasper and other precious stones. In the center, build a grand hall with a dome, its 4 walls made of solid gold and silver. Each wall should have 6 windows, each adorned with diamonds and rubies, except for 1 window which should be left unfinished. Additionally, there should be stables, horses, grooms, and slaves. Go now and make it happen." The palace was completed the following day, and the genie transported Aladdin there to witness that all his instructions had been faithfully carried out. A velvet carpet was laid from Aladdin's palace to the Sultan's as per his request. Aladdin's mother dressed herself elegantly and walked to the palace accompanied by her slaves, while Aladdin followed on horseback. The Sultan sent musicians with trumpets and cymbals to greet them, filling the air with music and cheers. Aladdin's mother was escorted to the princess, who greeted her and treated her with great respect. At night, the princess bid farewell to her father and embarked on the carpet with Aladdin's mother by her side, accompanied by 100 slaves. They were all enchanted by the sight of Aladdin, who eagerly approached to welcome them. Aladdin spoke to the princess, saying, "Princess, if I have acted too boldly, blame your beauty for inspiring me." The princess assured him that upon seeing him, she willingly obeyed her father's wishes. After their wedding ceremony, Aladdin led the princess to a hall where a lavish feast had been prepared. They dined together, and afterward they danced until midnight, celebrating their union. The next day, Aladdin extended an invitation to the Sultan to visit his palace. As they entered the hall with its 24 windows adorned with rubies, diamonds, and emeralds, the Sultan exclaimed, "This is truly a wonder of the world. However, one thing puzzles me. Was it intentional to leave 1 window unfinished?" Aladdin replied, "No, Your Majesty, it was by design. I wanted you to have the honor of completing this palace." The Sultan was pleased with the idea and summoned the finest jewelers in the city. He showed them the incomplete window and instructed them to make it match the others. The jewelers, however, expressed their inability to find enough jewels to complete the task. The Sultan provided his own collection of jewels, but even then, after a month, the work was only halfway done. Aladdin, aware that their efforts were in vain, told them to undo their work and return the jewels. With that command of the genie, the window was swiftly finished. The Sultan was astonished to receive his jewels back and decided to pay a visit to Aladdin. When he saw the completed window, the Sultan embraced Aladdin warmly. Meanwhile, the envious vizier suggested that it was the result of magic or enchantment. Aladdin had won the admiration of the people with his kind nature. He was appointed as the captain of the Sultan's armies and emerged victorious in several battles, all while maintaining his courteous demeanor. He lived peacefully and contentedly for many years. However, in a distant land in Africa, the magician who had encountered Aladdin in the past still harbored thoughts of revenge. Using his magical abilities, he discovered that Aladdin had not perished in the cave as he had assumed. Instead, he had escaped and married a princess, enjoying a life of wealth and honor. The magician knew that Aladdin could have achieved such success only with the help of the magic lamp. Determined to ruin Aladdin, the magician traveled day and night until he reached the capital of China. As he passed through the town, he overheard people discussing a magnificent palace. Curious, the magician inquired, "I apologize for my ignorance, but what palace are you referring to?" One of the locals replied, "Have you not heard of Prince Aladdin's palace? It is considered the most astonishing wonder in the world. If you wish, I can give you directions to see it." Grateful for the information, the magician visited the palace and realized that it had been conjured by the genie of the lamp. Overwhelmed with anger, he became partially consumed by madness. He was determined to acquire the lamp once again and plunge Aladdin back into abject poverty. Unfortunately, Aladdin was away on a hunting expedition for 8 days, which gave the magician ample time to carry out his plan. The magician bought a dozen lamps, placed them in a basket, and went to the palace shouting, "New lamps for old!" A mocking crowd followed him. Inside the palace, the princess was sitting in the hall with its 24 windows. Curious about the commotion, she sent a slave to inquire about the noise. The slave returned, laughing, which earned a scolding from the princess. When asked about the reason for her laughter, the slave replied, "Madam, who wouldn't laugh when seeing an old fool offering to exchange beautiful new lamps for old ones?" Another slave overheard and suggested, "There is an old lamp on the cornice there that he can have." Unbeknownst to them, it was the magic lamp that Aladdin had left behind, since he couldn't take it with him on the hunting trip. The princess, unaware of its significance, playfully instructed the slave to give the magician the old lamp in exchange for a new one. The magician eagerly snatched the lamp and told the slave to select a lamp from his collection. The crowd jeered and laughed as the exchange took place. Unconcerned by the mockery, the magician ceased offering his lamps and left the city, heading towards a secluded area. There he remained until nightfall and then pulled out the lamp, rubbing it as Aladdin had done before. The genie appeared and, following the magician's command, transported him, along with the palace and the princess inside, to a desolate location in Africa. The following morning, the Sultan looked out of his window towards Aladdin's palace, but was bewildered to find it gone. He summoned the vizier and inquired about the whereabouts of the palace. The vizier, equally astonished, attributed it to enchantment once again, and this time the Sultan believed him. Consequently, the Sultan ordered 30 horsemen to bring Aladdin back in chains. They intercepted Aladdin on his way home, bound him, and compelled him to accompany them on foot. However, the people who loved Aladdin followed, armed to ensure his safety. Aladdin was presented before the Sultan, who commanded the executioner to behead him. The executioner prepared to carry out the sentence, but just as he raised his scimitar, the vizier observed that the crowd had infiltrated the courtyard and was scaling the walls to rescue Aladdin. In light of the threatening situation, the vizier called out to the executioner, instructing him to pause. Faced with the determined crowd, the Sultan relented and ordered Aladdin to be released, granting him pardon in front of the onlooking multitude. Perplexed, Aladdin sought an explanation for his dire situation. The Sultan, enraged, pointed to the empty space where Aladdin's palace once stood and demanded answers. He expressed his relative indifference towards the palace, but insisted on the return of his daughter. The Sultan warned Aladdin that if he failed to find her, he would pay with his life. Aladdin pleaded for 40 days to locate the princess, vowing that if he failed, he would willingly face death at the Sultan's command. The Sultan granted his request, and Aladdin left the Sultan's presence filled with sadness. For 3 days he wandered aimlessly, resembling a madman, desperately questioning anyone he encountered about the fate of his palace. However, they merely laughed and pitied him. Eventually, he reached the banks of a river and knelt down to pray, contemplating throwing himself in. In that moment, he rubbed the ring he still wore, and the genie he had encountered in the cave appeared, asking what Aladdin desired. Aladdin implored the genie to save his life and restore his palace. The genie clarified that he was only bound to the ring and directed Aladdin to seek assistance from the genie of the lamp. Aladdin accepted this and requested the genie to transport him to the palace, specifically beneath the window of his beloved wife. Instantly, he found himself in Africa, beneath the princess's window, and exhaustion overcame him, causing him to fall asleep. Aladdin awoke to the melodious songs of birds, and his heart felt lighter. He realized that his misfortunes were a direct result of losing the lamp, and wondered who could have stolen it from him. That morning, the princess rose earlier than she had done since she had been carried into Africa by the magician, whose company she was forced to endure once a day. She treated him so harshly that he did not dare to stay there permanently. While she was getting dressed, one of her women looked out and saw Aladdin. The princess ran and opened the window, and at the noise she made, Aladdin looked up. She called to him to come to her, and great was the joy that overwhelmed these reunited lovers. After they embraced, Aladdin spoke urgently, saying, "Princess, I implore you in God's name, before we discuss anything else, for your sake and mine, please tell me what has become of the old lamp I left on the cornice in the hall with 24 windows when I went hunting." "Alas," she replied, "I am the unwitting cause of our misfortune," and she recounted the tale of the lamp's exchange. Aladdin exclaimed, "Now I understand that we have the African magician to blame for this. Where is the lamp?" "He keeps it with him," the princess divulged. "I know because he took it out of his robe to show me. He wants me to betray you and marry him, claiming that you were executed by my father's order. He constantly speaks ill of you, but I only respond with my tears. If I persist, I fear he will resort to violence." Aladdin consoled her and left momentarily. He exchanged clothes with the first person he encountered in the town and, having acquired a certain powder, returned to the princess. She admitted him through a small side door. "Put on your most splendid attire," he instructed her, "and receive the magician with smiles, leading him to believe that you have forgotten me. Invite him to dine with you and express your desire to taste the wines from his homeland. He will go to fetch them, and while he is away, I will instruct you on what to do." The princess listened attentively to Aladdin, and when he departed, she adorned herself joyfully for the first time since leaving China. She adorned a diamond-encrusted girdle and headpiece, and upon seeing her reflection in the mirror, she realized she was more beautiful than ever. She welcomed the magician with astonishment when he arrived, saying, "I have accepted that Aladdin is dead, and no amount of tears will bring him back to me. Therefore, I have resolved to cease mourning, and have invited you to dine with me. However, I have grown weary of Chinese wines, and would like to savor those from Africa." The magician eagerly hastened to his cellar, and the princess discreetly placed the powder that Aladdin had given her into her own cup. When he returned, she asked him to toast her well-being with the wine from Africa, offering him her cup in exchange for his as a sign of reconciliation. Before drinking, the magician delivered a speech praising the princess's beauty, but she interrupted him, saying, "Let us drink first, and you may say whatever you wish afterward." She raised her cup to her lips and held it there, while the magician consumed his wine to the last drop and then collapsed lifelessly. The princess then opened the door for Aladdin, and she embraced him tightly. Aladdin approached the lifeless magician, retrieved the lamp from his robe, and commanded the genie to transport the palace and all its contents back to China. The genie complied, and within her chamber the princess experienced only 2 mild tremors, unaware that she was now back home once again. The Sultan, who was sitting in his chamber grieving over his lost daughters, happened to glance up and rubbed his eyes in disbelief. There, standing before him, was the palace just as it had been before. He hurried to the palace, and Aladdin received him in the hall with 24 windows, with the princess by his side. Aladdin recounted what had transpired and showed the Sultan the lifeless body of the magician to convince him. A 10-day celebration was declared, and it seemed as though Aladdin could now live the remainder of his life in peace. However, fate had other plans. The African magician had a younger brother who was even more wicked and cunning than himself. He traveled to China seeking vengeance for his brother's death and went to visit a devout woman named Fatima, hoping she could assist him. He entered her dwelling, placed a dagger at her chest, and commanded her to obey him under the threat of death. He exchanged clothes with her, disguised his face to resemble hers, donned her veil, and murdered her to ensure her silence. He then made his way to Aladdin's palace, and the people, believing him to be the holy woman, gathered around him, kissing his hands and seeking his blessings. As he approached the palace, the commotion caught the attention of the princess, who instructed her servant to look out the window and inquire about the cause. The servant reported that it was the holy woman miraculously healing people with her touch. Intrigued, the princess, who had long wished to meet Fatima, summoned her to the palace. The impostor, posing as Fatima, offered prayers for the princess's well-being and prosperity. When he finished, the princess invited him to sit beside her and requested that he stay with her always. The false Fatima, delighted by the proposition, agreed but kept his veil down to avoid detection. The princess then showed him the hall and asked for his opinion. "It is truly magnificent," remarked the impostor Fatima, "but in my opinion it lacks one thing." Curious, the princess inquired, "And what might that be?" The impostor replied, "If only a roc's egg were suspended from the center of this dome, it would become the wonder of the world." From that moment on, the princess could think of nothing else but the roc's egg. When Aladdin returned from his hunting trip, he found her in a foul mood. He inquired about the cause of her distress, and she lamented that her enjoyment of the hall was marred by the absence of a roc's egg hanging from the dome. Aladdin reassured her, saying, "If that is all, you shall soon be happy." He left her side, took out the magic lamp, and, upon summoning the genie, commanded him to bring a roc's egg. The genie emitted a thunderous and horrifying scream that shook the entire hall. "Wretch!" the genie exclaimed, "is it not enough that I have fulfilled your every request? Now you have the audacity to command me to bring my master and hang him in the middle of this dome. You, your wife, and your palace deserve to be reduced to ashes. But I will spare you because this request does not come from you, but from the brother of the African magician whom you vanquished. He is currently in your palace disguised as the holy woman he murdered. Beware, for he intends to kill you." With those words, the genie vanished. Aladdin returned to the princess, claiming to have a headache, and asked for the holy Fatima to come and place her hands upon him. However, when the impostor magician approached, Aladdin seized a dagger and plunged it into his heart. "What have you done?" cried the princess. "You have killed the holy woman." "No," replied Aladdin, "but a wicked magician." And he proceeded to reveal the deception. Following these events, Aladdin and his wife lived in harmony. Upon the Sultan's death, Aladdin ascended to the throne, ruling for many years and leaving behind a lineage of kings.